Corrupt cops officers extorted a black mayor by mistake. Minutes later, they beg for mercy. If you're new to this channel, I invite you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any amazing new stories here. Karen, a striking woman with a strong voice, was at the heart of the city of Berkeley, California. Berkeley, a city surrounded by mountains and dirt roads, appeared quiet at first glance. When she took over as mayor, she brought a new perspective. Her candidacy was based on promises of justice, equality, and development, especially transparency and dignity. Many underestimated her because she was a woman and black. Many doubted that she would be able to govern the city firmly, guarantee order, and tackle the corruption that undermined citizens' trust in politics. The responsibility was great, but Karen always faced life with determination. She believed she could transform Berkeley by highlighting problems that many people ignored. On a warm Berkeley evening, on her way home from work at City Hall, the air seemed heavy on the dirt roads. Karen was driving home, tired after a long day at City Hall. When she was called to stop, Karen quickly complied, but was now more attentive. As she parked, she saw two policemen approaching. Their faces bothered her, a look of contempt and arrogance. "Good evening, ma'am," said the policeman, with a tone of false politeness. "Please, the car documents." Karen handed over the documents without question, but her expression revealed her discomfort. The other policeman began to walk around the car in silence, as if looking for something. Karen was aware that this was not normal. She watched the man who, after a few minutes, stopped in front of the tires and crouched down to examine them. "We have a problem," said the second policeman, standing up slowly with a sarcastic smile. "Your tires are very worn, ma'am. This is a serious offense." Karen frowned, feeling irritated. The tires were fine. A few days earlier, I had the car serviced. It was an obvious lie, and she knew where it would end. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's false," she replied firmly. "These tires are new. They're fine." The first policeman stared at his partner, and they both smiled quickly and mischievously. Karen already knew that look. She had grown up watching people subjugated by looks of corrupted power, of those who knew they were above the rules, even when it was their duty to protect them. "I don't make the laws, ma'am," said the first policeman, opening the ticket. "I'm going to charge you $5,000 for the irregularity. We can sort it out here if you like." The insinuation was obvious, and Karen's stomach churned. Corruption was clearly present, manifested in these two people in uniform who acted like criminals. She, who had fought for justice in her city, was now the victim of a despicable practice. Her indignation grew with each passing moment. "This is extortion," shouted Karen, showing her contempt. "I'm the mayor, and I won't tolerate this abuse. You will be hit for this." The policemen, upon hearing the threat, lost their cordiality. The second man, until then more restrained, advanced with fury in his eyes. "Whether you're mayor or not, we're in charge here," he snarled, dragging her out of the car. Karen didn't have time to act. Before she could defend herself, she was pushed against the hood of the car, her face pressed into the hot metal. She felt the pain of the assault on her body, a burning in her back as her arms were twisted and handcuffed. Karen screamed, not just from pain, but from anger and injustice. Coming to an abrupt halt in front of the police station, Karen felt the handcuffs tighten around her wrists, causing marks that burned like her indignation. She had been treated like a criminal by those who were supposed to protect order, and this generated intense anger. Karen realized that it wasn't just a physical attack, but a clear attempt to dominate her and weaken her authority in the city she had promised to protect. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The two policemen, without the mask of cordiality, pushed her out of the car with disdain. Karen's face, once calm, now reflected physical and emotional pain. Her eyes reflected a silent hatred that grew with each step towards the police station. The road seemed endless, each step echoing like a warning. As they entered the police station, the cold, gray atmosphere seemed heavier. The smell of metal and waste paper mingled with the muffled sound of phone calls and the rapid conversations of the police officers on duty. Karen was concentrating. Every detail of the place seemed more repugnant, knowing that behind the walls there was a corrupt system. That night, she decided she would tear it all down. The policeman led her into an interrogation room in silence, but the looks between them said more than any offense. One of them, who had faked the accusation of the worn tires, threw her into the metal chair, her handcuffs snapping as they touched the cold table. He stared at her defiantly, as if he had the upper hand. "Mayor, eh?" he commented, smiling arrogantly. That doesn't count here. The tension was evident, but Karen, wounded and humiliated, didn't give in. She knew it was a power struggle, and even trapped and surrounded by criminals, she wouldn't give up. Her strength came not only from her position, but from everything she had faced in her life. The struggles against racism, social injustice, and those who tried to convince her that she didn't belong at the top. What they did was a serious mistake, she replied, her voice firm. Her gaze was fixed on the policeman, as if she wanted to destroy them with her determination. You don't know who you're dealing with. This will end. You will pay for this injustice. The policemen exchanged glances, one of them still smiling cynically. They had underestimated Karen, thinking that the corrupt system that protected them was invincible, but they would soon realize otherwise. After minutes of silence, a policeman entered the room, and Karen recognized him as the shift manager. He looked anxious, sweat beading on his brow as he held Karen's documents. When he looked into her eyes, his face changed, and he realized the mistake they had made. The terror in his eyes was instantaneous. He knew Karen. "Let her go," ordered the chief, his voice shaky and almost desperate. The two policemen hesitated, surprised by their superior's change of attitude, but soon opened Karen's handcuffs with trembling hands. The silence that followed was as intense as the shame on the policemen's faces. Karen rubbed her wrists, but the internal pain was greater. There was no way to erase what had happened. They had humiliated her and treated her like a criminal, and this would not go unpunished. "I hope you're ready," said Karen, standing up firmly, her voice calm but suggestive. "Because there will be no consequences. I'm going to make sure that justice wins." She turned and left the room with her head held high. The corridor of the police station looked like a battlefield, and every step reflected the weight of her decision. As she entered the police station, a cool breeze caressed her face, in contrast to the heat of anger she still felt. Karen got into the car, more determined than before. There was no turning back. It was personal. The corrupt Berkeley system, represented by uniformed figures who intimidated and extorted, would be brought down at any cost. Back at City Hall, Karen rethought her strategies, her hands shaking with indignation as her body pulled itself together. It was time to be strong. She knew that this episode was just the start of a bigger battle, and she was ready to fight. Arriving at the office, scarred by the recent violence, she called an urgent meeting with her team. It was impossible to delay or hesitate. The city needed firm leadership and was not going to back down. When they arrived, the aides found Karen standing with a rigid posture and a more serious countenance than ever. Her eyes conveyed a mixture of restrained anger and firm determination. This was no ordinary meeting. It was the turning point everyone had been waiting for, even without realizing it. "Everyone sit down," she ordered firmly, demonstrating her authority. There was no room for smiles or formalities. It was a fight for life. As the team settled down, Karen described precisely what had happened that horrible night. The aides listened in silence, horrified by her words, unable to believe that the mayor had been the victim of such brutal abuse by the security forces. The humiliation, violence, and threats were in Karen's words, like a wound that demanded an immediate response. "They didn't know who I was," Karen said firmly, "and now they're going to regret every minute of tonight." Her gaze swept the room, making it clear that there was no room for weakness or doubt. She had a loyal team, but she knew they would face major obstacles from now on. Police corruption in Berkeley had become evident and violent. Now she was fighting for her dignity and that of the city. "Let's make a law," she said, her voice firmer, as if absorbing her own pain. "A law that stops police extortion with severe punishments. No more impunity. They will pay for every citizen extorted and every abuse committed." The team watched her in silence, impressed by the power of her words and aware of the struggle they would have to pass the law. Corruption had dominated the city for a long time, and the police officers challenged by Karen were not just individuals, but part of an entrenched system, protected by a network of influences at all levels of local government. "Let's do this quickly," she said, determined. "Tomorrow I want a draft of the law ready for the council. There's no time to lose." As Karen spoke, her advisors looked at each other with concern. They recognized that she was right, but they knew that confronting the city's corrupt system would have consequences. Karen, however, stood firm. She knew the risks and that the path would be difficult and dangerous, but she was willing to face them. She wouldn't accept silence or complacency. It can't be any longer. And I want you to understand, she said, facing her team, that I will not rest until this corruption is eliminated. I'm not just doing this for myself. I'm doing it for every citizen of this city who has been cheated and mistreated. This is our fight, not just mine. Karen's advisors knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The meeting was a call to arms, a declaration of war against corruption disguised as public order in Berkeley. Karen, in pain and scarred from the violence, showed no weakness. She was more than a mayor. She was a symbol of resistance to injustice. In the morning, Karen was in her office. The night was spent gathering information to create a new law that would punish corrupt police officers and reinforce that no one is above justice. She knew she was dealing with a corrupt system, but she wasn't afraid. Upon arriving at City Hall, the team found Karen standing with papers on her desk and a concentrated look on her face. She would no longer accept impunity. The police had crossed a risky line and would suffer consequences. Karen was aware that confronting the system would not be easy and would expose her to new threats. For her, fear served as fuel. The more she was challenged, the more determined she became. She gathered the documents ready and called her team together for a decisive meeting. When everyone arrived, Karen spoke directly. "Today we are going to transform the future of Berkeley," she said seriously. "What happened yesterday is a reflection of a bigger problem. We live in a city with epidemic police corruption, a place where citizens are being exploited, disrespected, and assaulted by those who should be defending them." The advisors agreed in silence, aware of the truth and the weight of what was coming. They knew that confronting the police wasn't easy, but what was at stake was more than politics. It was the morality of the city. "Today I'm going to present a new law," said Karen, holding up the papers. "This law will punish police officers who extort, abuse, or threaten Berkeley citizens with up to 10 years in prison. We will no longer accept impunity. We will not allow these abuses to go on unanswered." A moment of silence stood out in the room. Everyone understood what she was saying. The proposal for a strict law seemed daring and risky, but no one questioned Karen. She spoke with such certainty that her advisors knew that resisting was futile. That morning, Karen's posture conveyed an aura of inevitability. The city needed that law. The city needed it. "This will be the anti-corruption law," Karen said emphatically, "and it will be strictly enforced." She knew that passing the law would take effort. She would have to face resistance from the city council, which had long-standing ties to the police. There was also the fear of retaliation. The defenders of police corruption would not stand idly by while their privileges were threatened. Karen wasn't going to back down. After talking to her team about the new legislation, Karen made a strategic decision. She decided to hold a press conference to expose corruption in the city. On the same day, she called local journalists to the town hall. By exposing the problem, she would increase the pressure on the corrupt. It was a risky but essential move. Karen was ready to risk everything to ensure that the law was passed and strictly enforced. As the town hall filled up with reporters and equipment, Karen took to the podium in a dignified manner. Her face was bruised, highlighting the seriousness of the situation. The flashes illuminated her face, but she remained firm. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I am here not only as mayor of Berkeley, but as a citizen, a mother, and a defender of justice. I was a victim of violence last night, something that is unacceptable in our city. Police officers, who are supposed to protect us, use their power to extort, threaten, and assault. This cannot go on," the journalist soon murmured. It was unusual for a public figure like a mayor to confess to being the victim of such violence. Karen knew she had to reveal the truth so that the system could be confronted. "Today, I present the Anti-Corruption Act, which will punish with up to 10 years in prison any law enforcement officer who abuses their position to extort citizens. Berkeley will not submit to corrupt police officers. I urge the council to vote now to pass this law." The following silence was tense. It wasn't just a bill, but a declaration of war on an unstable system of power. Karen would not hesitate, despite the risks. The following weeks saw intense political mobilization. Karen and her team worked hard to get the anti-corruption law passed. There was opposition, of course. Members of the council, afraid of retaliation, tried to prevent the vote, while others, loyal to the system, tried to delegitimize the mayor and her proposal. Public pressure, driven by the press conference and citizen outrage, made the issue impossible to ignore. After weeks of debate, the law was passed. It was a great victory for Karen, but she recognized that the real challenge was beginning. The city was about to be hit by a storm, and those who stood to gain from police corruption would not stand idly by. Karen's name began to resound in the police barracks like a murmur of discontent. Corrupt cops, under the command of Raymond, a veteran with a troubled past, were angry. Raymond became the symbol of resistance to the mayor. For him, Karen was not just an impertinent mayor, but a woman who defied order and had the courage to oppose the power they held unchallenged. Corruption was the lifeblood of many there, and the new law could destroy what they had built with intimidation and violence. At the police station, Raymond chatted animatedly with his colleagues. He knew that, with the new law, it was only a matter of time before more of his men were arrested. Karen's new law was already having an effect. Police officers investigated for extortion had their silence broken by citizen complaints. Raymond was not only a police leader, but also the link in a network of corruption. He knew that if the mayor continued her fight, his position of power in the police station would be threatened. He knew that action had to be taken, something that would prove to Karen and the city that bringing down her empire of corruption wouldn't be easy. One hot night, Raymond secretly summoned trusted police officers. These were men who, like him, had benefited from the extortion system and were not ready to give up their privileges without resistance. The room was small, dark, and tense. A dense silence dominated the room until Raymond, with his striking presence and icy gaze, began to speak. "Does this mayor think she can bring us down?" he began, his voice low but full of hatred. "She thinks she's going to destroy everything we've built with one stroke of her pen? This is much bigger than she thinks. We're not going to let this woman destroy our lives. We won't let her destroy what's ours." The men near Raymond agreed in silence, their faces marked by anger. They realized that Karen's new law was a direct threat, and the thought of seeing colleagues being arrested was unbearable. They didn't think the mayor would beat them easily, but they didn't expect her to create a law that would leave them in jail for 10 years. "We need to resolve this," said a police officer, breaking the silence. "We can't let it continue." Raymond, with a sad smile, knew it was time to act. His mind was already devising a plan. He wouldn't back down in the face of threats or allow his power to go unchallenged. Karen believed she was in a position of power, but she would soon realize how risky it was to challenge men like him. "The mayor wants to play at justice?" said Raymond, his voice low and calculated. "Let's show her what real fear is." The aim, at first, was not to kill Karen. He knew that if anything serious happened to the mayor, the city could collapse, and the state and federal authorities would turn to Berkeley. Raymond needed something discreet that would destabilize Karen without arousing suspicion. He suggested a plan to give her a scare, a stern warning that if she persisted in her moralistic crusade, the consequences would be serious. "Let's kidnap the mayor," said Raymond, staring at his men. "We're going to beat her up to show her that if the law isn't repealed, the situation will get worse. We don't want to kill her, yet. We want her to fear and feel the consequences of getting in our way." The surrounding police officers listened attentively to the plan. Some hesitated, knowing the risks, but most agreed. They had profited so much from the corruption Raymond provided that they couldn't afford to lose everything now. Karen would be kidnapped and beaten as a warning. A clear warning that the law she had passed would be canceled, or her life would become a nightmare. Preparations for the kidnapping began immediately. Raymond and his men knew they had to act soon, before more police were arrested, and the investigations intensified. Karen had started a war, and now they would prove that they wouldn't give up without a fight. That night, while the plan was unfolding in the city, Karen was at home, thinking about the victory of passing the law. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she believed she had started down the path to free Berkeley from corruption. That evening, Karen went out for a walk, as she usually did to relax. The air was warm, and the streets of Berkeley quiet, with the lights of distant lamps and illuminated houses. She walked alone, thinking about the progress in the fight against corruption and the next steps. Her footsteps on the sidewalk were the only sound, but the peace would soon end. A black car approached slowly, without causing suspicion. The headlights were low, and the car's passengers watched Karen's every move intently. Raymond was giving the last instructions to his men in the car. The plan was simple and violent. Kidnap the mayor, take her to a remote location and beat her. They knew Karen wouldn't give in easily, so they needed to show her the gravity of the situation in an intense way. The car stopped near Karen. Before she noticed, 3 men got out of the car and surrounded her. One of them, strong and tall, held her firmly, while another covered her mouth to silence her screams. It all happened in seconds. Karen struggled, but the men were strong. She was dragged into the car and thrown into the back seat. The car drove off abruptly, and Karen, stunned, felt fear overwhelm her body. She knew about the danger, but she didn't have time to be afraid. In the midst of the chaos, her mind began to work intensely. Who could be responsible for this? Were the policemen arrested because of the law? Raymond came to mind quickly, and her heart raced as she realized that her fight would become more personal and risky. The vehicle sped along the dark, deserted roads around Berkeley, away from the city. The sound of the tires on the asphalt was intense, and the air in the car was tense and violent. Karen tried to keep calm as she watched the men's faces and license plates, looking for details to help her escape. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp punch in the stomach and a cold laugh. "Now you're going to learn to behave yourself," said Raymond from the front seat, revealing himself. He turned to look at Karen, his face illuminated by the dim lights coming through the car windows. His eyes reflected hatred and pleasure, as if he were enjoying that moment of power. Karen, racked with pain, stared at him with repulsion and determination. She knew Raymond was dangerous, but she wouldn't show her fear. Despite her vulnerability, the mayor wouldn't give in. "Do you think you can stop me with violence, Raymond?" Karen muttered, firm in her pain. "You and your cronies are weak, hiding behind uniforms and corruption. You won't be able to win this battle." Raymond laughed sarcastically before replying, "This is not a battle, Mayor. This is a statement. Repeal this law now, or next time you won't get out of here alive." The car stopped in a secluded clearing in the forest surrounding the town. Karen was pulled out of the car and thrown onto the rough, leaf-strewn ground. The men surrounded her, while Raymond, with a menacing smile, watched from afar as his henchmen assaulted her. Every blow and kick was a sign that her life was in danger. Despite the violence she suffered, Karen's mind remained firm. She understood that it was Raymond's strategy, to intimidate her with force, to make her give up the fight. Karen was driven by something other than fear. The pain was strong, but her anger kept her on her toes. If she survived the night, she would do everything she could to bring down Raymond and the corrupt police. After a long bout of pain and beatings, the men left her on the ground, wounded but alive. Raymond approached, kneeling beside her so that his words could be clearly heard. "Repeal the law," he threatened. "Next time it won't just be you. Your daughter is in danger too, Mayor. Think about it." Raymond and his men returned to the car, leaving Karen alone in the darkness of the forest. When the sound of the engine faded, Karen, despite her tiredness and pain, managed to stand up. Every movement hurt, but she knew she had to get home. She had to live, because her battle wasn't over yet. Karen walked slowly down the road, alone, the metallic taste of blood still on her lips, as her mind processed what had happened. Raymond had underestimated her by thinking he could bend her violently. After the violent kidnapping and beating she suffered at the hands of Raymond and his cronies, Karen returned home, physically and emotionally bruised, but more determined than ever. Emily, an 8-year-old girl, was Karen's pride. The mayor of Berkeley always acted for her daughter's future, and for the city she wanted to bequeath to the next generation. Emily was happy, and despite her age, understood her mother's important responsibility. Raymond, angry that Karen hadn't backed down after the first attack, thought it was time to step up. He knew that Karen would never give in to physical threats. Her spirit was strong. Like every mother, her weak point was her daughter. Emily was the solution to breaking Karen's resolve and forcing her to give in to the wishes of Raymond and his corrupt cops. It was decided that Emily would be kidnapped. Raymond's men, skilled in violence and betrayal, organized the kidnapping with precision. They knew where Emily played, and knew that the ideal moment to act was when the girl was calm, surrounded by her friends, in an apparently safe situation. And that's what they did. A black car appeared on the street where Emily was playing, without arousing suspicion. The children were playing, laughing and running around. Without noticing, the vehicle stopped on the other side of the street. Everything happened quickly. 3 men got out of the car, masked and armed, in seconds. Emily didn't notice what was happening. When the men approached, her first reaction was to continue playing, thinking they were just adults in the street. One man quickly grabbed Emily, covering her mouth with his hand as he lifted her up. The children's laughter stopped, and a muffled scream rang out in the street. The other children, surprised, stopped for a moment and then ran and shouted for help, but it was too late. Emily was pushed into the back seat of the car, which sped off, disappearing around the corner. The street was filled with despair. The children ran home, screaming for their parents, crying with fear. Karen was in the kitchen when she received the news, trying to maintain her routine despite the physical and emotional pain. When she heard the knocks on the door, her heart sank into an unknown fear. A mother shouted into the house, "They've taken Emily!" Karen's world collapsed in an instant. She ran out of the house, eyes wide with panic, heart racing and mind in shock. The children with Emily cried, trying to explain what had happened, but their words were lost in the chaos. What Karen understood was enough to leave her breathless. Her daughter had been kidnapped. Karen knelt in the street, with a silent scream and tears flowing. The physical pain she had felt days before was insignificant compared to the terror that now dominated her mind. All he could think about was that his daughter, his greatest treasure, was in the hands of monsters. The fear was agonizing, like a knife slowly cutting through her heart. Just then, while Karen was trying to understand what had happened, her phone rang. Her hand trembled as she held the phone, aware that the voice on the other end could alter her daughter's future. When she answered, Raymond's cold, familiar voice rang in her ears. "If you still want to see your daughter alive, you'll do as I say," said Raymond with frightening calm. "Repeal the law, Karen. This is your last chance. Repeal the law, or Emily will suffer the consequences of your stubbornness." Raymond's words hit Karen like knives to the heart. The fear of losing her daughter was mixed with anger at having to give in to those men who wanted to destroy her. Karen understood that she was facing an impossible decision. Her determination to fight corruption was firm, but how could she risk Emily's life? She couldn't. Karen's silence on the line was the answer Raymond had been waiting for. "Good girl," he said in a venomous voice. "Tomorrow, I expect you to repeal this law. If you do anything stupid, you won't see your daughter again." The call ended and Karen remained motionless, holding the phone in her hand in shock. Tears streamed down her face and fear gripped her chest like an iron fist. Emily was in danger, and Karen knew she had to give in. She couldn't put her daughter's life at risk, even if it destroyed her dignity and principles. The sacrifice felt right. That night, Karen sat alone in the living room, searching for a solution, but found no way out. In the morning, she complied with Raymond's demand. She called a press conference and emotionally announced the repeal of the anti-corruption law. Her words were heavy, and at the end of the announcement, she left the press room in silence, devastated. Raymond fulfilled the agreement hours later. Emily was dropped off safely in a park on the outskirts, but she was unrecognizable. She was silent, with a faraway look in her eyes. When she was hugged by Karen, Emily mumbled, "I don't want to leave the house anymore, Mom." Gasping for breath and her heart racing, Karen called several times. The word revoke was like a stab in her throat, but she knew there was no alternative. Within hours, the Berkeley press gathered at City Hall, ready to hear the announcement that would take the city by surprise. Everyone was waiting for the mayor to comment on the recent kidnappings and arrests, but no one was ready for what would happen next. As Karen entered the hall, she looked like a shadow of the strong, determined woman she once was. Her pale face and deep circles under her eyes showed sleepless nights, and her body, still scarred, reflected the emotional weight she bore. The worst thing was her eyes. The gleam of courage she had always had was now absent, giving way to the empty stare of someone doing the unthinkable by force. Karen stepped up to the podium, the flashes illuminating her tired face, amid an uneasy silence. She clutched the microphone with trembling hands, took a deep breath, and began to speak, her voice shaken by despair. "Today, as a mother, I have to decide against my beliefs." Her voice trembled, and she paused to contain her emotion. "The anti-corruption law, which I proposed, and which was passed to protect our city, will be repealed. The journalists present murmured. It was sad news. Everyone knew Karen's dedication to passing this law, a symbol of her battle against corruption. It was unthinkable to see her give it all up. The details were yet to come. My daughter Emily has been kidnapped, she said, almost whispering. To ensure her safety, I'm being forced to give in to these men, monsters who hide behind uniforms. I'm forced to choose between justice and my daughter's life. Karen let the tears flow down her eyes without trying to hide them. She was a devastated mother, and the weight of the world seemed to fall on her. The journalists remained silent, surprised by the revelation. Emily's kidnapping clarified everything, and the terror of the situation was clear. Karen had to give up her greatest political achievement to protect her daughter. I know that many will not understand my choice, she said, trembling. I recognize that I will be breaking the trust that many have had in me. As a mother, I cannot put my daughter's life at risk. The pain in Karen's words was visible, and she left the room without replying. She felt hollow, incomplete, as if she had lost her identity. The mayor, who had fought so hard for justice, was now a mother defeated by despair. She knew that the decision would mark her forever. On returning home, Karen sat down on the sofa, and silence took over. Hours later, Raymond kept his promise. Emily was found alone and frightened in a park outside the city. The relief of having her daughter back was immediate, but as Karen hugged her, she sensed that something wasn't right. Emily, once excited, was silent, her eyes on the ground, avoiding looking at her mother. The trauma was clear. Mom, I don't want to leave anymore, said Emily, her voice low, and Karen's heart broke. The mayor, who had faced many challenges, was now dealing with the biggest. Her daughter was ruined. Emily, my love, it's all right, Karen said in a shaky voice, driving with one hand and holding her daughter's cold hand with the other. Mom's here. No one's going to hurt you. I promise. Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed, her body curled up in a defensive position, as if trying to understand the horror of what had happened. She was present, but her mind seemed distant, trapped in a fear that Karen couldn't understand. When they got home, Emily went to her room in silence. She didn't eat, play, or talk. Karen, unable to cope, felt as if part of her was being taken away. She had faced numerous battles in her life, prejudice, corruption, and an oppressive system, but nothing had prepared her for the pain of seeing her daughter incurably hurt by words or promises. The mayor, who had stood up to the abuses of Raymond and his cronies, now felt more fragile than ever. It wasn't just the weight of giving in to blackmail for Emily, but the fact that even so, her daughter wasn't safe. Emily's soul was deeply wounded, and Karen knew that healing would be slow and uncertain. After the rescue, Emily lived in seclusion. She didn't want to leave her room, she didn't want to play, and whenever Karen tried to talk to her, the little girl would respond with a blank stare or a sentence that broke her mother's heart. I don't want to leave the house anymore, Mommy. The words, repeated like a mantra, reflected the terror that Emily associated with the outside world. The kidnapping, the threats, and the time with the kidnappers had left deep, invisible scars. She no longer felt safe at home or with her mother. The world became threatening, and even the walls of her home seemed fragile. Karen, dealing with her guilt and pain, spent hours at Emily's bedside, searching for the right words to comfort her. She told stories, brought her daughter's favorite toys, and sang the songs Emily loved before what happened. Nothing seemed to break down the wall that the little girl had built around herself. It will pass, my love, Karen said softly as she stroked Emily's hair. It will pass, I promise. You're safe with Mommy here. One day, seeing Emily at the window, Karen slowly approached and knelt down beside her. The silence between them was heavy, and Karen, distressed, tried again to reach Emily. Do you want to play, Emily? She asked, hoping that her daughter would respond differently. Emily denied it with her head, looking at the horizon, as if the outside was a threat. No, Mom. I never want to leave again. The words echoed in Karen's mind like a blow. Karen's daughter was imprisoned by fear, and she didn't know how to help her. In a moment of desperation, Karen turned to the only one who could help her, her brother, Tyler. Tyler, who left Berkeley to enlist, now lived in Chicago. a man shaped by military experiences and special operations. He was a man who didn't back down in battle, a connoisseur of violence and strategy. Tyler had always been a beacon of strength for Karen, and even from afar, she knew she could rely on him. Karen hesitated before picking up the phone. She hadn't spoken to Tyler for months. Despite their busy and distant lives, the bond between them had always been strong. She understood that by asking for help, she was putting herself in a risky situation, but she also recognized that Tyler was her last resort. It was no longer a question of political justice or morality. It was a question of retaliation. Tyler was the ideal leader for this revenge. As she dialed Tyler's number, Karen felt both relief and anxiety. Her brother's voice on the other end of the line brought her a sense of security she hadn't felt for a long time. "Karen?" "What's wrong?" Tyler asked, noticing the tension in his sister's silence. "Tyler, I need your help." Karen's words were difficult, as if recognizing her vulnerability was the last barrier. "They took Emily." Tyler remained silent, taking in what he was about to hear. He understood that they referred to something much bigger than just criminals. Karen's tone of voice, full of pain and anger, showed that it was more serious than he had imagined. "Who is it, Karen? What's going on?" Tyler's voice became deep, with each word filled with concern and urgency. Karen told him about the kidnapping, Raymond's blackmail, the repeal of the law, and above all, the situation of her daughter Emily, who lived in constant fear. As she spoke, she felt anger and guilt rising up, each word a reminder of her failure to protect the city and her family. Tyler listened in silence, but Karen knew he was angry. He had always protected her since childhood, and now the thought of cruel men abusing his sister and niece filled him with rage. Tyler, prepared for danger, knew the importance of a strategy, but recognized that revenge sometimes required personal action. "I'm going to Berkeley," said Tyler, interrupting Karen. "Me and some friends. Let's work it out, Karen. These men won't hurt you, Emily, or anyone else." The determination in Tyler's voice gave Karen hope, but also terrified her. She understood what that meant. There was no room for diplomacy or fixing the system internally. Tyler and his colleagues were military men prepared to eliminate threats directly and effectively. Karen wasn't asking for more justice. She was looking for revenge that would bring peace by eliminating the guilty. "Tyler, She hesitated, her voice unsure. "I don't know if it's right." Tyler interrupted her in a calm but firm voice. "It's not about right or wrong, Karen. It's about what needs to be done. The men kidnapped Emily. You've been threatened by them. They are tearing the city apart. If the system doesn't punish these individuals, we will." Karen closed her eyes and let the tears fall silently. She recognized that Tyler was right. The system was totally corrupted, and the laws she valued no longer protected the people of Berkeley, nor her daughter. She tried conventional justice and was unsuccessful. It was time for a new kind of justice, which Raymond and his men had not foreseen. "Right," she said firmly. "Come on. I'll tell you everything you need to know." Tyler and some Army colleagues arrived in Berkeley over the next few days. They were men experienced in special missions, prepared to face internal and external threats with lethal efficiency. Karen knew she was up against an implacable force, and even though she was reluctant to use extreme violence, her desperation for justice and her desire for revenge prevailed. When they arrived at Karen's house, Tyler and she embraced in silence. He looked at Emily, sitting in the living room, withdrawn and distant-eyed, as her hatred for Raymond intensified. It was irreversible. He would do whatever it took to restore peace to his sister and niece, which those men had taken away. "Where do we start?" Tyler asked, looking at Karen firmly and coldly. Karen took a deep breath, realizing that a new stage in her life was beginning, with no room for regrets or turning back. "Let's talk about Raymond," she said, with restrained anger. "He's responsible for everything. I want him to pay for every second my daughter was afraid." Tyler agreed, planning his next steps. He knew that Raymond was the type who only understood strength. Tyler was ready to hand it over. "Are you ready?" Tyler asked, staring into his sister's eyes. His tone was not questioning, but confirmed that she knew what she was asking. Karen took a deep breath, looked at the city she had tried to save, and nodded. Tyler and his army colleagues settled into a house on the outskirts of Berkeley, owned by a trusted friend who had also worked with him on special missions. The simple house, on the side of a dirt road, served as a base for future plans. Raymond and other corrupt police officers continued to extort citizens, convinced that the repeal of the anti-corruption law ensured their impunity. They didn't know what would happen. That night, Karen and Tyler met with the men to talk about the plan. The living room of the house was dimly lit, and the chirping of crickets outside was the only sound to break the silence. Tyler put the map of the city on the table and began to mark the police patrol routes, the extortion sites, and where Raymond and his men met to plan illegal activities. "They won't know what hit them," commented Tyler's friend Jackson, a tall, strong man, as he looked at the map. "They're used to acting without fear, thinking that no one will stand up to them. Let's surprise them." Karen watched in silence, taking in every aspect of the plan. She wasn't a strategist, but she trusted Tyler and his men. They were ready to face any challenge that Raymond and his allies presented. Tyler would do anything to keep Emily safe and ensure that the men responsible for her trauma were punished, even if it required force. "Raymond is the mastermind," said Tyler, pointing to a spot on the map. "He's the boss. If we take him down, the others will fall. We mustn't act in a hurry. We'll take down their system, capturing the smaller fish one by one, until Raymond has no more options. Now let's look for him." Karen agreed. The plan was clear, precise, and effective. Tyler knew that attacking Raymond directly could cause a violent reaction, putting more people in danger. It was necessary to undermine his power in order to make him vulnerable. The strategy had military precision, something that Tyler and his men controlled with skill. Over the next few days, the actions began. Tyler and his men, under cover of darkness, began to intervene in corrupt police officers involved in extortion. Corrupt police officers, led by Raymond, extorted citizens openly, believing that nothing would stop them. That night, they carried out an illegal blitz, stopping cars, asking for bribes, and intimidating drivers. The abuse of power was evident, with no intention of justice or protection. For Raymond and his team, it was just another night on the job, an endless cycle, until they became the target. Tyler and his men studied Raymond's movements. They knew it was the perfect time to strike. In disguise, they watched as corrupt police officers intimidated citizens, laughing as if they were untouchable. Raymond and his cronies were unaware that this was the last time they would act with impunity in Berkeley. Tyler silently signaled to his men. Jackson, who had served with Tyler on several missions, led a group along a side route, while the others headed towards the blitz site. Decisions had to be made quickly. Every move was meticulously planned, with every second counted. Shadows moved quickly through the empty streets, approaching the officers unnoticed. The sound of an approaching car caught Raymond's attention. The vehicle drove slowly along the road, slowing down as it approached the blitz. Raymond smiled, confident that he would be able to extort a vulnerable driver once again. He signaled for one of his men to stop the car, but before he could give the next command, everything changed. Heavy footsteps sounded, followed by a crash. Tyler and his team had arrived. In one swift movement, Jackson and the other soldiers surrounded the police officers and quickly disarmed them. A clandestine blitz, which was going to be another night of abuse, turned into a battlefield. Raymond, surprised, tried to act. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially so boldly. He shouted for his men to pick up their weapons, but they were confused by the speed of the attack. Tyler addressed Raymond with frightening calm. Raymond's gaze, which had once conveyed confidence, now showed panic. "Who are you?" shouted Raymond, trying to remain calm, as Tyler approached without stopping. "I'm the brother of the woman you tried to intimidate," Tyler said, his voice firm but low so that only Raymond could hear. "Now you will pay for what you did to her and to this town." Before Raymond could act, Tyler advanced with rapid movements. Raymond tried to fight with his fists, but he couldn't stand up to Tyler. The two fought intensely, with punches and kicks resounding through the silent streets. While Raymond acted out of fear and anger, Tyler fought with cold determination, motivated by the desire for revenge and justice. The other policemen tried to resist, but Tyler's men easily subdued them. Jackson and the other soldiers used their combat experience to disarm and arrest the policemen. The sound of boots on asphalt and the choked cries of pain dominated the night during the chaos of the blitz. The citizens stopped by the police were in shock, unable to believe the situation. The untouchables were being humiliated after years. The battle between Tyler and Raymond raged on. Raymond, realizing he couldn't beat Tyler's military training, tried to escape, but was knocked down by a kick. He stood up, staggering, with blood in his mouth and a face expressing hatred. "You think that's going to stop me?" Raymond shouted, frustrated. "I'm the authority here. You can't change that." Tyler made no reply. He struck Raymond in the face again, knocking him down. When Raymond fell again, unable to get up, Tyler knelt beside him, staring into the corrupt policeman's eyes. "You were never the law," said Tyler in a cold voice. "Now you're going to face real justice." As Raymond lay on the ground, panting and defeated, Tyler stood up and signaled to Jackson and the others. Within minutes, the corrupt cops were handcuffed, disarmed, and humiliated on the ground. The sirens, once used to intimidate, now sounded like a symbol of downfall. The sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of police reinforcements. This time, it wasn't to rescue Raymond and his men. It was to keep them in custody. Karen monitored from a distance and watched in silence as the lights of the vehicles illuminated the scene. She realized that this was the beginning of the end for Raymond and his corruption. When they arrived, the police were met by Tyler, Jackson, and the others, who immediately explained the situation. There was clear evidence of corruption and abuse of power, and the officers, although reluctant, had to arrest their own colleagues. Raymond, handcuffed and defeated, was thrown into the back of the car, glaring hatefully at Tyler. Karen approached slowly, watching Raymond with satisfaction and sadness. This was the man who had destroyed so much in his life, his career, his city, and most painfully, his daughter's innocence. Now he was on the ground, powerless, about to face the consequences of his actions. "I told you you'd pay for this," said Karen, her voice firm with emotion. Raymond looked away, aware that his fall was total. Berkeley, after a long time, saw justice meted out to those who thought they were above it. The trial took place weeks after the arrests, generating great anticipation. The people of Berkeley expected strict punishment for Raymond and the other police officers for their crimes. Karen, Tyler, and their military colleagues gathered solid evidence. Witnesses, documents, and recordings incriminated the corrupt police officers. Justice was certain. Karen knew from bitter experience that in politics and the law, not everything was as it seemed. The pressure on the local judiciary was strong. Raymond and his allies had ruled the city rigorously for years, and now, with the trial approaching, Karen feared that some of Raymond's former accomplices in the system would try to interfere. She knew that the deputy, a friend of Raymond's, still had power and influence. Karen knew that, despite the efforts to dismantle corruption, men like the deputy would do anything to defend their interests. The night before the trial, Karen's feeling was confirmed. Tyler was reviewing the trial evidence at home when Karen received a phone call. The voice was familiar. The judge in the case, who Karen had thought was honest, but now sounded tense and scared. "Karen, I need to talk to you," said the judge, his voice trembling. Karen felt her blood run cold. Something wasn't right. "What happened?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "I was threatened," confessed the judge, trembling. "They know where my family lives. 3 men came to my house tonight. They said that if I convict Raymond and the others, I will never see my wife and children." The revelation impacted Karen. Although Raymond was in prison, his power was still perceived through the allies he left behind in the city. The system was once again showing its corruption. "My God," Karen whispered, trying to understand the seriousness of the situation. "And what will you do?" After a silence, the judge replied in a voice laden with guilt. "I can't put my family in danger, Karen. If I convict them, they will destroy me. They told me that they have contacts everywhere, and that my life will change if I oppose them." Karen remained silent, the judge's words echoing in her mind. She understood what this meant. Justice, so hard won, was about to be stifled again, not by Raymond, but by the system that was supposed to protect the innocent. Fear had triumphed, and the judge, who had promised to do the right thing, was now intimidated, forced to violate his commitment to justice. "Are you going to clear them?" Karen asked, her voice low and somber. "I have no choice," the judge replied, desperate and ashamed. "Tomorrow, I'll have to declare everyone innocent. I'm sorry, Karen, but I'll have to fine you for interfering in the proceedings." Karen could hardly believe her ears. The system was ready to clear Raymond and punish Karen for her fight to reveal the truth. The judge said that Tyler and his friends would be imprisoned for their actions in the confrontation, treating them like thugs. "It's an injustice," Karen exclaimed, unable to control her anger. "They're to blame, you know. Now you say you'll punish those who fought corruption?" "I have no choice," the judge said, almost crying. "They'll kill me if I do otherwise." After the call ended, Karen felt more powerless than ever. She had dedicated her life to fighting corruption and seeking justice in Berkeley, but with the imminent trial, everything was falling apart again. The system was hurting her. The next day, Raymond would be released, Tyler and his friends arrested, and Karen fined and publicly shamed. That night, Karen sat in the darkness of her living room, the weight of betrayal overwhelming her. She knew she couldn't let it all end like this. The city she had promised to protect was being ruined from the inside out, and Emily, her daughter, remained traumatized, living under the influence of that dread. Karen fought hard, but the corrupt system was almost winning. As the tears flowed, a new determination arose within her. Karen concluded that she couldn't trust the system to guarantee justice. She could no longer rely on legality, given a corrupt system. If the laws couldn't stop Raymond and his allies, she would have to find another solution. On the morning of the trial, Karen met Tyler and his friends, explaining what the judge had said. Tyler was visibly angry, but ready for what was to come. "I told you from the beginning, Karen," said Tyler, his voice cold and firm. "The system won't solve this. To achieve justice, you have to take severe action." Karen recognized that her brother was right. Karen realized that the legal path had been exhausted. The rules she had always followed and defended had been twisted and used against her. What was left now? What was left for someone who had given up everything for justice, only to see that justice taken away from her? Only revenge. That evening, Karen met up with Tyler, who was being held with friends, awaiting their sentences. Karen struggled to arrange the meeting, but she still had contacts in the city who, despite their fear, believed in her. As she sat opposite Tyler in the cold cell, her brother looked at her with a firm expression, without surprise or despair. "I knew this would happen, Karen," Tyler said, his voice deep but controlled. "They would never allow us to actually win. The system is corroded." Karen agreed, with a lump in her throat. She wanted to fight and shout against injustice, but the words sounded empty. There was no point in discussing justice anymore. The system had let her down, and the only way out was to act outside of it. "I know," said Karen, controlling her emotions. "But we can't let them get away with this, Tyler. After everything they've done to Emily, to me, and to this town." Tyler leaned in, looking into Karen's eyes and noticing the change in her tone. Karen's face no longer reflected that of a political leader, but that of someone ready for a new war, a war that he, as a military man, understood well. "What do you propose?" he asked, with curiosity and approval. Karen hesitated, but knew there was no turning back. The plan she had devised after the trial was risky, but it was the only way to ensure that Raymond and his accomplices were no longer a threat. It was a plan of retaliation, not reconciliation or institutional justice. The only solution was to arrest Raymond and his allies and expel them from the city forever. "Let's run," said Karen, her voice low but firm. "You, your men, and we'll take Raymond and the corrupt cops with us. Let's settle this once and for all." Tyler fell silent, reflecting on her proposal. His sister wasn't one to take decisions lightly. If she was proposing this, it was because she believed there was no other option. He observed his two colleagues in the cell, who also seemed to realize that the situation was irreversible. "Where are we taking them?" asked Tyler, more curious about the progress of the plan than discussing the ethics of the action. Karen, who had planned everything, said that they would take Raymond and his accomplices to a remote island in Finland, guaranteeing that they would never return to Berkeley or anywhere else. It was a remote, little-known place with weak laws where people disappeared. She obtained the contacts through an ally of Tyler's, who had taken part in secret missions abroad and had access to this information. "An island?" Tyler said, raising an eyebrow. "That's clever. They'll never get out of there." "Exactly," said Karen. If the system doesn't offer us justice, we'll create our own. That means removing these people permanently. If we let them loose, they'll destroy everything we touch. I won't let Emily grow up in a place run by men like Raymond." Tyler smiled as he saw the determination in his sister's eyes for the first time since prison. He had always known that Karen had strength, but now he saw in her the coolness needed to face the enemy when normal options failed. He nodded to his cellmates, who soon understood what to do. "And how do we get out of here?" asked one of the men, in a low but determined voice. Karen worked that out too. Over the last few days, while the trial was taking place, she worked in secret with her contacts in the city. A prison guard had been doing her favors since before the mess with Raymond. He would be responsible for opening the cells and making sure that Tyler and the others got out before dawn. Karen believed the plan would work, despite the difficulties. "I've got everything ready," she said without hesitation. "When you leave, we'll go to the abandoned warehouse in town. Everything will be ready there. You'll be given the weapons and vehicles you need to capture Raymond and the others. We'll take them to the private airport. From there, to the island." Tyler agreed, now fully in favor of the plan. He knew that, although risky, it was the only option to ensure that Raymond and his cronies would never threaten again. Berkeley, Emily's safety and Karen's sanity were at risk. They needed to act quickly. The following night, the escape went according to plan. The guard at the prison opened the cells, allowing Tyler and the others to escape quietly. They sneaked through the dark streets to the warehouse, where Karen was waiting with the resources for the mission. The cold dawn brought a solemn stillness, as if the city sensed something monumental about to take place. The arrest of Raymond and his accomplices took place with the same precision shown by Tyler and his men from the start. They broke into the homes of the corrupt policemen, disarmed them, and took them away in vehicles without attracting the attention of the sleeping city. Raymond, surprised at night, was the last to be arrested. He thought he was protected by the system, but now he realized that the justice he had despised had caught up with him. "You can't do this!" screamed Raymond, tied up and put in the back of a vehicle. "I am the law. You'll be sorry." But his words went unheard. Tyler calmly made sure that all the men were under arrest before heading to the airport. The plan was going perfectly, and the early morning still kept the group safe from prying eyes. A private jet was at the airport. As the plane took off, carrying Raymond and his cronies to the island in Finland, Karen felt the weight of her choice, but also a strange lightness. She had done what was necessary to protect her city, her daughter, and herself. Although she knew that justice was painful, she knew it was the only path available. Karen turned to Tyler, who was standing next to her, as the plane disappeared over the horizon. "Are you finished?" she asked, in a tired but hopeful voice. Tyler looked at her, and for the first time in a long time smiled. "Yes," he replied. "It's over." "You did it," said Tyler, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but full of pride. He recognized the value of that journey for Karen, and was glad to have been by her side at the crucial moment. Karen smiled at her brother, even though his face was still tired. "We did it," she corrected, touching Tyler's shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you, without your strength and courage." Tyler only confirmed it. He knew that Karen's strength was her main asset, but he admitted that together they had achieved something incredible. With the threat of Raymond removed, it was time to consider the next steps. Days later, Berkeley felt the first signs of transformation. The lack of Raymond and his corrupt cops was evident. The citizens, shocked by the sudden absence of those who ruled the city with impunity, began to realize that something important had happened. The streets, once marked by fear, were now filled with relief and curiosity. Everyone knew that Karen had played a part in Raymond's downfall, but no one knew how. Raymond's escape and capture were not widely publicized, and Karen decided to keep the details secret. What mattered to the citizens was an end to the terror. Days after Raymond's capture, Berkeley City Hall held a ceremony to honor Tyler and his supporters. The interim mayor, appointed by Karen to his post during the recovery, began his speech by thanking Tyler and the military for their courage and service to the city. He didn't give details of the operation, but the gratitude was evident. "Today, Berkeley is free again," said the mayor, his voice strong in the square. "We owe it to the courage of Tyler and his colleagues, who risked their lives for us. They represent justice and strength, and that's why we celebrate them as heroes. I'm not a hero, said Tyler, firmly and humbly. I did what needed to be done. The real hero is my sister Karen, who never gave up, even when all seemed lost. She is the reason for Berkeley's revival. She fought with incomparable strength, and for that she deserves all the recognition.